Hello and welcome. Some say the bright light is good, others not so. And my appearance this morning would suggest it might have been better to have left the bright light off. We have cats going very wild and behaving very excitedly also this morning. I've been on 2 trips recently, 2 little excursions away from here, and returned as of the time whilst recording this talk yesterday afternoon from the most recent of those 2 trips, which was to India. Now, I'm not going to talk about my travels and journeys and all I encountered specifically, as this is not a travel talk, video, channel. In fact, the scenery doesn't change much. I might alter the angle of the camera when the weather improves, maybe go outside. But it's not a vlog of Sri Lanka, or Thailand, or India. It is a place where we discuss the Dharma. However, often, in relation to those trips, or as I implied towards the end of last week, those adventures, those going forth into samsara, as bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, as monks, we go forth, it is said in the scriptures, into monastic life, by way of ordination, renouncing worldly life in exchange for the life of a samana, or the life of a renunciant, an alms mendicant, a homeless beggar. Firstly, as anagarika, which literally means homeless one, and then the refuge of a monastery, temple, a community of fellow monastics. We live, we're trained, we practice. But there comes a time when one might take leave of that environment after some years of experience and go and find a place to practice in solitude, alone, in the forest, at the foot of a tree, in a cave, an empty building, or simply outside, sleeping on the hillsides and under the stars. And I think during these last 10 years or so, I've lived in all of these places, including communities. And my first trip, a couple of weeks ago, at the end of the Vasa, was to return to one of those communities. Somewhere, though, I had not stayed before, but only visited, and that is the island hermitage. Polgastura is the Sinhali name for a little island in quite a large lake. It is in fact one of 2 islands with a little adjoining bridge, where Bhante Nyanatiloka established what I think is fair to be considered the first monastic order or monastery or monastic training ground for Western monks or foreign monks. So those interested in Buddhism coming from Europe, UK, USA, to Asia, seeking something, often in the first place not knowing what it was they were seeking. So back then in the early 1900s, Bhante Nyanatiloka, coming from Germany, had heard about Buddhism, was travelling, and when asked which is a good book to read when beginning one's research and exploring one's interest in Buddhism, I usually say a book called The Word of the Buddha. And this was a book written initially by Bhante Nyanatiloka, and later, as of all of his writings, was translated into English by one of his disciples, Bhante Nyanamoli, whom is also a very famous translator of the Pali scriptures. And between them, they established what is well known throughout the world as the Buddhist Publication Society, now based here in Sri Lanka in Kandy, but its originations go back to that island, Polgastura, the island hermitage, where Bhante Nyanatiloka first formed this foreign Sangha of Buddhist monks. So, those listening whom are more knowledgeable of Theravada Buddhism in the West and the Thai forest tradition may well have heard of Wat Pah Nanachat in Thailand, the international forest monastery, which welcomes people from all over the world to live there, practice there, train towards becoming an Anagarika, then a Samanera, a novice monk, and ultimately, after quite a few years, ordination by way of Upasampada, higher ordination, into full monastic life as a bhikkhu. And this monastery was established back 50 years ago, I should think, more than 50 years ago. And the senior, as they are now, senior monastics of the Thai forest tradition that came from the West were there in Thailand practicing Buddhism under Thai forest meditation masters, you might call them, those who have benefited from the revival of the forest tradition in Thailand, which came about through the great teachers of the past, pioneers in that revival, such as Ajahn Mun and his disciples and that lineage. Now, after 2 world wars through which Bhante Nyanatiloka here in Sri Lanka was incarcerated, here in Thailand, also in India, as a prisoner of war, but primarily as being a German citizen in the wrong place at the wrong time, or possibly the right place at the right time, because his incarceration did enable him, throughout both wars, to continue his practice. But as a result of this, the popularity, the knowledge of this very small island hermitage waned to some extent, albeit its activities intellectually with translation and production of books and literature through the form of the Buddhist Publication Society increased and continued because of the devotion of what is and was then a Buddhist country, the lay practitioners who fully supported and do to this day support practice in that place. So it is as a result of these activities through Bhante Nyanatiloka and his disciples and the Sangha here in Sri Lanka that we in the West, as Buddhist monks that you hear from now, maybe visit and speak to now, can be grateful to and owe our well, everything too. Because as a result of their adventures into the East and their establishment of the foreign Sangha in Asia, those pioneering monks that went to Thailand and then practiced under the Thai forest masters first heard the word of the Buddha, reading, for instance, that book, The Word of the Buddha, a beautiful summary of the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, covering Vinaya aspects, so monastic life, the rules, the code of conduct for bhikkhus. The suttas, the teachings of the Buddha, and even the Abhidharma is covered in a concise form within this relatively small book or booklet. So as a result of that, albeit long, long ago, there were Buddhist monks in the West, that Sangha had long since died out in Europe, overtaken by Christianity, as in most places. But there was this revival of the modern world, investigation, inquiry, interest, travelling becoming not easy, not like it is today, but more possible. Those postulants, if you like, coming from the West to the East. From that seed that was sown by Bhante Nyayataloka here in Sri Lanka, specifically on that island. Now subsequently he went and with the Buddhist Publication Society to Kandy, Colombo, the major cities, and the little island hermitage became sort of overtaken just as a village monastery with local monks. But over the last sort of 40, 50 years has been revived as a forest monastery again. It isn't open to visitors, lay practitioners, other than locals on specific religious festivals and occasions. It is a place of practice and a place of training for Buddhist monks, or potential Buddhist monks. And for that reason, it is very exclusively private, but also a very beautiful, serene place of practice. Its flora, its fauna is very natural, as it always has been. There are no, dare I say it, there are no cats, there are no dogs, which are a more domesticated, modern form of animal we're used to encountering in monasteries, being that it is on an island. There are some of these wild cats, there are some other unusual creatures you might not see on the mainland, so to speak. But it's very natural, very peaceful. And there are kutis built in the forest, and it was there that I visited. Now to me, it is a place of pilgrimage. Not because it's one of the Buddhist holy sites, which are also, to me, a place of pilgrimage, and to many other practicing Buddhists. I've visited those throughout India. Firstly, the main four holy sites, the place of the Buddha's birth, then his enlightenment, and his first teachings, and then his death. In fact, I was ordained in Bodh Gaya, the place of the Buddha's enlightenment in India. But somewhere I always wanted to visit and initially set out on my travels to go and visit was this particular island hermitage, out of reverence for, devotion if you like, but primarily gratitude to that as the place, and out of respect and in memory of the founder and establisher of that place, Bhante Nyanathaloka from Germany, whom surviving 2 world wars and his teachings surviving for now hundreds of years later and still as popular and read today, if not more so than ever, being what is to the West, the Western bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, our first introduction, not to just Buddhism, but to this form, monastic life. After all, Bhante Nyanathaloka was a Western man, educated, but coming from the modern world to ordain into this form in a foreign culture, land. He wouldn't have watched videos or read books about the process. He would have literally had to have dived in at the deep end to immerse himself in what he'd only heard and read and had been described in the sutras themselves, in the words of the Buddha. Fortunately, the form itself, albeit it changes culturally through cultural influences over the decades, millennia even, at its core remains the same. That Vinaya, the rules, are the same. The teachings, the core teachings of the Buddha are the same. The Sangha itself in its appearance, what we have, what we own, is the same. But he brought all that to us in the West, giving us that opportunity, and our now great forest masters, teachers, whom are now getting towards the end of their lives, were also introduced to this form within Buddhism. So long before that, we had Buddhism in different forms by way of historians, translators, and scriptures. But ordination for a Westerner into monastic life was somewhat unheard of. And if it happened, those individuals were never heard of again. They would disappear into the forest, or the mountains, the Himalayas, or whatever. But through and out of compassion for others, the generosity of Bhante Nyanathaloka and his works, we've all come to hear of his teachings. So I consider that as a place of pilgrimage, and was very happy to have the opportunity to, well, I had some time at the end of the Vasa, and things had been busy here with the refurbishment of this building to create this meditation hall. So I took the opportunity just to literally jump on a bus, took my bowl and my Sangati, that being one of the 3 robes, this upper robe and the lower robe here. And that's all. Toothbrush. And off I went on the bus and my umbrella. Pindapata bowl over my shoulder, a little sack bag thing we have for any other bits I was taking also. And without summoning any form of local support, upasakas or anyone to take me down in a car, a kappa or anything like that, I thought, no, I'm just going to go wandering off in that direction, which was my original intention when I came to Sri Lanka. But on this occasion, not to keep going and travel Sri Lanka, because I've come to learn that since being here, that in Sri Lanka, the wandering practice is quite rare and not as pure as it might have been many years ago, in the sense that wherever you go, you're noticed as a Buddhist monk, and people want to look after you, support you, help you, give you accommodation. So you're not literally wandering from the foot of one tree to a cave, to the foot of another tree, to sleeping outside. In fact, to some extent, sleeping not in a kuti, a little hut for a monk here, is a little frowned upon. As much as I would love to just sleep on the beach here, live under the trees, it's not really acceptable because they hold bhikkhus, monks, in such high esteem. They want to make them comfortable. And I'm kind of going to move on to that subject matter in a moment, as it leads quite nicely into one of the first comments I come to from someone today. If I have time, if I get to that comment, that is. So I had a wonderful 4 days. I arrived at the island hermitage, spent 3 nights there. My first stay, although the abbot there, very kind monk who's lived there for over 20 years, 20 vasas, 20 monsoon seasons. So I can stay as long as I like, which I was very happy to hear. But I thought it's only polite to just stay a few days, plus my responsibilities here. When I say responsibilities, they're duties I've brought upon myself to, by way of the Buddhist order of things, the way the Buddha teaches bhikkhus to live, by way of going on Pinapata every day, to be seen, to make that presence of the Sangha known in the village and the nearby town. Then distributing all those alms I receive, which are far too greater amount than I need in one day, to go and distribute those accordingly. Nowadays in the local hospital, to the wards, the inpatients staying there, so they have some nice breakfast to wake up to every day. And seeing people locally when they come to visit, whether it's to sit and meditate, or to just look and stare at the foreign monk, or ask questions. That is what I'm here to do in my own practice, which is the majority of the time. So having established this little situation here, I felt bound to return as I am here now. But subsequently then had to make what has become, I don't normally talk about it because it's become so much part of the course of events over the last decade. Every 6 months, with the exception of during the COVID time, I have to leave a country, wherever it may be, and then I can usually return again without a problem, because visas normally have that rule, wherever you might be, that at least every 6 months, 180 days, you have to leave that country and return, in order that you're not trying to gain any residential status or rights, I don't know. It seems rather unnecessary, doesn't it? But this is the order of things. This is society. This is worldly life. This is samsara. And that is what I've just come back from. I had to go forth into real samsara. Now, samsara is all around us. It's in all the realms. Even living the monastic life. Even in a life like as secluded and picturesque and beautiful, albeit it was raining a lot, but so it had its difficulties, on an island, like the island hermitage, a forest monastery, and perhaps as ideal for a practicing forest monk as you can get, you still have the worldly goings on of your mind. Your past is not forgotten, but has to be let go of, and your future aspirations, imaginations can still be there, and too need to be let go of. So samsara follows you, your mind, your thinking brain goes wherever you go. We don't run away from it, but we are more easily able to face up to it, recognize those hindrances of greed, hatred, and delusion. Lobha, dosa, moha. So from that that environment to what is perhaps its almost opposite extreme, other than being dropped, say, in the city of London or New York, Paris or Rome, or late on a Friday night, which could be considered the opposite of monastic life. There are various grey areas in between that a bhikkhu might encounter. And one of those is these visa runs. So I could go to another Buddhist country, Thailand, where the process would be very smooth, very easy. In fact, when living in Thailand, before the current troubles and difficulties I've heard that might be going on there now, one literally could just cross a bridge into Cambodia to the other side, walking, and then walk back across the bridge back into Thailand. And this was considered a visa run, or satisfying the requirements of your visa and parting for 6 months. Lots and lots of rain at the moment, even though the monsoon season officially finished. That is related to India. Here it seems to have just begun, and that pop, flash, bang, which you probably didn't hear, was my Kuti electricity exploding again. It's got wet, it keeps doing this, exploding, and then all fusing and turning off. Hopefully the electrician man might come this evening to fix that. So I'm primarily living back with candlelight again, which I rather like in my Kuti, but at least here seems to be dry and relatively, well, mostly dry, apart from that corner, unaffected. But my trip to Samsara involved, from this end, very nice and smooth, very nice, easy journey. My local Upasikas, a family whom are good supporters, came to collect me in the early hours of the morning. They have a car, so we can go on the highway, the Sri Lankan highway, to the airport more quickly, rather than the tuk-tuk coastal road picturesque route. So they collected me, took me to the airport, very smooth. I fly with Sri Lankan Airlines, usually, for these trips. And they're very supportive of Buddhist monks, of course. And it was very easy. I don't have to queue. I don't have any awkward questions. It's just simple. I have no baggage, no luggage. I literally get out of the car, walk through the airport, more or less get on the plane, and then get off at the other end. And everything up until that point is totally, it's like really walking from here to the village and back again. It's very simple, because it's entirely Buddhist. People who've grown up with monks in a Buddhist country, in a Buddhist environment, with that religion that I'm coming to talk about again in a moment, with that comment, the Buddhasasana. So, very beautiful, very smooth. But then I have to face, like hitting a brick wall, bang, the non-Buddhist world. That is India, which is not a Buddhist country. It comes from India, Buddhism, but it's long since gone. There are many millions of Buddhists there, but it's also a very, very hugely populated country. The most populated country, I think, in line with China these days, and huge geographically. So Buddhists and Buddhist monks are fish out of water there. So I hit customs, security, whatever you call it, immigration, and I'm asked all of the usual questions. What's your purpose of your visit? Where are you coming from? Where are you going to? Blah, 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 blah. And my answers, which are truthful, are never met with much of a positive response. In fact, I become immediately very suspicious. And I was thinking about this before I go. So this time I chose to be even more honest, not more honest, to give them as much information pertaining to the facts as possible. And I said exactly what I was going to do when I get there. I'm going to go, it's early morning, to a place where I might get some food, eat my food, then I will rest, and then I'm going to get on another plane and go back to Sri Lanka. And this was met with disapproval, it seemed, at first. So I quickly added in, because my visa in Sri Lanka has come to the end of 6 months, boom, finished, I have to leave, I have to return. And when I said that, they were okay. It was, oh yes, okay, yeah, that's fine. And they stamped, because I already have a visa for India. But same, I can't stay there for more than 6 months. In fact, there I am not allowed then to stay for the rest of the calendar year. I have to wait until the following January before I can return, which is why I do not live in India. It's not practical to do so for a British citizen. I'm only allowed to live there for 6 months in any calendar year. And then I come out of the airport and there's taxi drivers, there's people touting every possible service that they might be able to offer to a foreigner, a tourist. Which is all I am there. It's all I am here. But here, with this form, I'm recognized as being a religious person, a practicing Buddhist monk. There, I'm just anyone. Not religious. They would like to take me to a restaurant, they would like to take me to the best hotel, they want to show me the Taj Mahal, even though I'm miles and miles away from it. All of this stuff, and they're blah, 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 all coming towards me. But I fortunately have done this a few times. I know my route to where I'm going and where I can stay for some rest for a while and do all these quickly things and say, no thank you, no thank you, no thank you. And this is the world, this is the busyness of samsara. It was also pouring with rain there. And I can fully understand why the Buddha said during the Vassa, bhikkhus, you stay put, don't go anywhere for the 3 months rains retreat. Because it's very difficult in these robes when you get wet. They're difficult to get dry, they become very heavy. I didn't take an umbrella just because of the sheer awkwardness of taking an umbrella on an aeroplane and whether it can even be done or not. I'm not going to bother even entertaining that idea. And most of the walkways are covered, so you can dart from one place to the other. But it was the contrast of two travel experiences I wanted to just reflect upon there. Quiet hermitage on an island for practice of meditation, and the busy city in India where everything is going on. Diwali had just finished. Fortunately, otherwise it would have been a case of fireworks being covered in dye powder and ink and paint and all kinds of goings on. I fortunately just missed that. And it was probably as a result of those festivities having just ended why it was quieter, along as well as because of the rain, quieter than it normally is when I go there. But I'm not complaining. I'm used to this. And the practice is the same. As I was being questioned, or interrogated, I would say, and cross-examined as to my purpose for visiting the country, which to me seems unusual. As a tourist, surely you want to be made welcome. Oh, okay, yes, you have the relevant paperwork. Please enjoy our country. Your stay here, however short it may be, you would think. There's ultimate suspicion as to your intentions. It comes across that way anyway. But maybe they're just very efficiently in security and immigration doing their job. I've had countless experiences of this situation, which I don't go into, there's no need. But it's all facing samsara, worldly life, and the difficulties that most people are facing each and every day of their lives. And to some extent, as a bhikkhu, monks and nuns are secluded from. And this is why there is the Sangha. This is why the Buddha formed the Sangha, to give people that opportunity to renounce worldly life and be secluded from all of those goings on. But you're not secluded from the goings on in your thinking brain, or the other khandhas, this physical body, its feelings and sense consciousness, the explosions, the lack of electricity, the pouring rain, the damp, the rotting feet. Sometimes, too much water, sometimes not enough water. All of these goings on, elements of discomfort. One experiences living in monastic life also, but of a different nature. The different kinds of wild creatures, scorpions and snakes, one might face in the island hermitage that one wouldn't face maybe in the cities of India. That there you have the rats, the sewage, the different aromas, let's say, that you might encounter. But I did take advantage of the fantastic food. So that was useful. That was good. That was enjoyable. You can enjoy things as a monk, In fact, it's about enjoying life to the maximum. It's about seeing what it is that's troubling us, recognizing our suffering, identifying its cause, and then being able to use the situation to your advantage. So whilst the interrogation was going on, I was very much able to breathe, coming back to the present moment, and take my time answering, in hopes the interrogator might just get fed up and wave me through, which didn't happen, but giving me time to formulate my answer clearly, concisely. I'm just visiting briefly and returning to Sri Lanka tomorrow for no other reason other than it's a condition of my Sri Lankan visa. Although the eyes are rolling and thinking suddenly, okay, yes, stamp, and you're free to go, to face the hordes of touting taxi drivers and tuk-tuk drivers outside. But overall, it was a successful trip. Within a few hours, I was back on a plane and on my way back. And at this end, from the moment I reached the gate, the boarding gate, which is manned by Sri Lankan airline staff, I was back in monkland again. Suddenly, everybody wanted to help me, was hands in Anjali, paying respects, which I really, don't expect from people. But this mutually beneficial relationship, this interdependence between the Sangha and lay practitioners is a beautiful thing, a beautiful existence for both sides, otherwise it wouldn't have continued for 2,570 years. This is what has sustained the Sangha and the Buddhist religion, as we have come to call it. Now, do I have time, I wonder? Yes, I think so, for this question relating to just that very subject. I'm sure other aspects of those two recent trips will, as they all relate to Dharma, which is after all everything, come up in the course of answering other comments and questions over the course of, as long as I'm doing this. As all my previous experiences and trips do. It is this practical application of Dharma that I try to share with you here. And without that, I wouldn't have survived as many of those trips as I have done to date over the last 10 years, which is about 20 or so. Plus there have been occasions where that has been shortened. So even taking into account the time we didn't have to travel during COVID, where I was just confined to India and a specific region in India. Partly I was confined to a place in the UK as well, but mostly I was in India. Other than that, I've been travelling regularly 2 or 3 times every year for these short trips. And they can become, if you allow them to be, very difficult, very stressful. But for me now, I think of them as a moment to consider the liberation and freedom a bhikkhu has. When I pick up my bowl and my 3 robes, they're my main 4 requisites. My razor, my cup, my pindapata, a belt, and a sewing kit is all I am. When I pick that up and go towards any form of travel, to get an aeroplane, to go elsewhere, I never know if I'm coming back. I never rely on the fact that I'm coming back. So I leave wherever I'm leaving clean and tidy and hopefully better than I found it. Whether it's Sakuti on the island, which is incidentally not very far from here, so I will be going regularly, or whether it's here, this was a run-down building and now it's a beautiful meditation hall, so it's certainly better than it was before, in most people's opinion. And my kuti is left clean and tidy, so someone else could make use of it if I was to never return, straight away. But if I'm fortunate enough to return, it's already waiting for that return. Albeit a bit wet and the electricity keeps exploding for me. Very minor problems. But these things are Dharma. These are worldly things, but also aspects of monastic life that can affect you, do affect you. It's how they affect you that you can choose. So we choose to see this as just something, a situation that we would rather be otherwise. But as the case is, it is like this and it is just that. So until it changes, which it will, because all situations or things are impermanent, albeit that they are unsatisfactory. Until it changes, we just abide with it as it is. We're surviving, it's okay, it's good enough. But it isn't. Most of these external factors are not within our control, any more than our physical bodies or our thinking brains are within our control. There is no self in that sense. There is no self in any sense. It is just experience. And these experiences are educating us, are helping to train us, whether we are lay practitioners or monks, whether we're in worldly life, samsara, or monastic life, samsara. They're all part of this human realm, or worldly realm. So, this question, what is your definition of religion, and why has Buddhism been classified as one? So my definition of religion, my definition of anything is relevant. So the definition of Buddhism, of religion, the word religion, is an interpretation of different cultures, societies, and different individuals. And your interpretation may be different to that of mine. However, its etymology, the word religion, comes from the Latin religio, which means to bind, to bring together. And over time it's become perceived as a word to mean binding with, coming together with celestial forces or a higher power, a god, or heavenly realms, angels, spirits, and many gods. So religion has come to mean, to most, a belief in something, and the worshipping of what it is you believe in, a practice of worship. So religio means coming together and being devoted to that coming together, but has come to mean the coming together of humanity with celestial forces. But originally really means the coming together of all beings within humanity, or humanity itself. So a brotherhood, a partnership, a sisterhood. In fact, first came about really religious religion comes about through the formation of monastic organizations, monks or nuns. And at the time, in Christian orders. So what it means to me is religion, on the face of it, is something that is a word that's been adopted and culturally influenced and used to represent the main religions, belief systems. Then you ask, well, why has Buddhism become classified as one, a religion? Well, in fact, even in Buddhist countries, it is not classified as one, because those countries are not English speaking, and their languages' origins don't necessarily come from Latin or Greek. So religion isn't a word, albeit it's later been adapted and used. So we have the sasana, the Buddhist sasana, which gets translated as Buddhist religion, but actually really means the sasana, a Pali word, means doctrine or writings. Religio in Latin also means reading of, rereading of. So religions are rereading some form of doctrine, scriptures. If that's a belief system, like the Bible or the Quran, then it's reaffirming one's beliefs and worship practices. Whereas if you're rereading the scriptures in Buddhism, the Tipitaka, there is no belief or no thing to be believed in within them, but a way of living, a way of practice, a philosophy. And yes, a doctrine and an understanding of what will happen if you are able to live that way, practicing that way, keeping precepts, practicing meditation, developing wholesome mind states, reducing unwholesome mind states, will lead to freedom from suffering and liberation from rebirth. But we're not asked to believe in rebirth, believe in karma, believe in the Buddha as our teacher, but to understand that there are these teachings which are evidence of a teacher's existence. And if we practice those teachings, we can experientially see the benefit of that practice within this lifetime. So, has it become a religion? On the face of it, yes. You can say that a Buddhist country like Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka has a department of Buddhism in its government, if you like, in its cultural or legislative structure, even political structure. Here there is the Buddha Sasana. In Thailand there is the Sangha Raja. But neither of them are the ministry of Buddhism, a ministry of religion. We translate them as the ministry of Buddhism, and they're even extended these days to be called the ministry here. The Buddhasasana is the term for that ministry, that department, but it's extended to the ministry of Buddhism, religion and cultural affairs. But these are just later additions to try and sort of make it clearer to foreign inquirers as to what that department is about, all-encompassing, if you like. But the meaning of religion is often and usually interpreted as an organization using a religion, a belief system, for some kind of power and gain. And yes, often it very much is. But this is not the practice of Buddhist practitioners, and not necessarily the practice of other faiths, religions, believers, devotees in those alternate philosophies. These are just the nature of society, culturally influenced, politically even influenced, financially influenced. But that is not what we pay or draw our attention to. Our practice is very clearly defined in the Tipitaka, in the scriptures, as is in other religions, in, say, the Bible or the Quran, which don't make reference to all of these organizations: the Vatican, the Buddhasasana, the Sangharaja, the Church of England. They don't get mentioned in the scriptures. They've come about in samsara as worldly aspects, taking advantage of religion. And all religions, even Buddhism, to some extent are affected by that. But our practice, as the Buddha teaches us, we practice, firstly, to improve ourselves, thus setting an example for others to follow. Doesn't have to be influenced by those organizations, if there are such. So that's what I understand by religion. It's just a word. And Buddhism can be called a religion because it is, after all, a rereading of scriptures. And we are binding ourselves in both the form of the Sangha, monks and nuns, and the form of lay practitioners, upasakas and upasikas, not only within our own communities, but interdependently with each other, to support each other. And that is what has kept this Buddhasasana going and strong for 2,570 years. And the Buddha predicted would go for another about that length of time. He suggested the Buddhasasana, his Buddhasasana, would only last 5,000 years. So even the Buddha doesn't expect Buddhism to be a permanent religion, but for various reasons will fade out over that time. But for now, we're in the middle part of this Buddhasasana. If you want to compare it to a religion such as Catholicism or the other theistic faiths, Islam, Judaism, then it cannot really be compared. There is no hierarchy, no pontiff, no leader. It is it's the structure within the Sangha is dealt with by means of how long one has been in the robes, and that alone. Not even your attainments in the practice are given consideration, or shouldn't be, because they're not spoken of other than amongst your equal brethren or more senior brethren. So they're not known publicly. Therefore, the hierarchy is literally by the length of time one has been in the robes, not even your physical age. And it's not by a voting, a democratic process, that one becomes an abbot. It's by the misfortune of having to take on those responsibilities of running a monastery. It doesn't even necessarily mean the abbot of a monastery is the most senior by way of the number of vassals monk within that organisation, within that community. They've just taken upon themselves to be the incumbent of those responsibilities of running and organising the establishment. But in that sense, the larger those communities are, the more organisation there is that's needed. But most of this is usually taken upon as a responsibility of the lay practitioners supporting that community. The monks themselves just have the final say, really, as being that they are responsible as the Sangha for the running of that organisation. But not being able to handle money or use money, everything is outside of our remit. We're just practitioners. And the length of time in the robes is all that determines literally where we sit in the temple or where we stand in the line for queuing for our food, if we're receiving alms being served to us, for instance, as opposed to being alone on Pindapata. But even on Pindapata, if there's more than one monk, we go in order of how many vassals, how many years you've been in the robes. The most senior first, just so as the lay practitioners know, out of respect, who to offer food to first in the line. And there needs to be some kind of order just to keep things tidy, and that's the only reason. But we always pay respects to our elders, because after all, they have managed to stay in the robes longer than we have. We never know how long we will be able to remain living in this form. Whatever our intention, as long as our practice is good, it should be for a long time, or until we die. But that may, in the case of my ordination, in latter years of my life, will be far less vassals, far less years than someone who ordained at the age of 20, whom already, if they're my age, will have considerably more vassals than myself. So that's as religious as it gets in Buddhism, and it's called a religion because there are so many people whom are bound to it. And religio means binding of people together with a common interest. But it doesn't have to be a common interest of worship and belief. It can be a common interest of anything. One religiously goes to the gym every day, one might say. So that's the explanation of the word. Do you think Buddha thought he was creating a religion? Well, he said he was creating the Buddha Sasana. And Sasana means a way, and yes, an organisation, if you like, but a coming together of similar ideas through a doctrine, which is not a dictatorial doctrine, but a series of suggestions which will lead us out of suffering, not through belief or worship or devotional practices, but through a way of living, that being the Noble Eightfold Path and the precepts. no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying and taking of intoxicants. Refraining from, as opposed to you must do this. So this is the big difference. If religion covers Buddhism and other theistic beliefs, the big difference is we're not prescribed as to having to do anything, rather than we must refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying and taking of intoxicants. But we're not prescribed, as in this religion, this Buddha Sasana, as to having to worship a god, having to respect one belief, but more to practice for our own benefit, and therefore, as a result of that, the benefit of many others. So he was creating the Buddha Sasana, this common way of living, philosophy, doctrine. At that time, there was no word religion. There was no language Latin. There would have been something very similar. Yeah, there would have been that language, but perhaps not in these parts. There was Greek in these parts at the time, as is seen with the Ashoka columns, which have various languages, being the first time anything was written down in India around them. That's a whole other subject. After all, this is all just language, and using this whole convention of language to create subject matter. As a Buddhist practitioner, you know you don't believe in anything or worship anything. But that's not to say that Buddha didn't say in the scriptures that it's okay to build some stupas in reverence to teachers, as ways of mindfully marking and respecting those teachers and the Dharma. Elders of our organizations, but not to be prayed to or to be worshipped, but as reminders for us to continue in our practice and to attain to the levels they might well have attained to themselves. And then you say, I wonder if Buddha came walking into your temple today, what he would think regarding what he taught and the way that he taught from his experiences. So we don't try to say or think what the Buddha might have thought from his experience. He teaches us what we need to know, coming from his experience and his thoughts in the scriptures, in the suttas, as enough. But as he describes, just merely a handful of leaves compared to all of the leaves on the forest floor is what he imparts to us of his knowledge. A very small percentage of what he knows. So one would never presume to know what he would think if he was to walk in here now, but one must remember this is firstly not a temple. It is not on consecrated ground or hasn't been consecrated by way of any form or religious ceremonies. It is just a building, an empty building we are using as a meditation hall. It is not mine, you say your temple. So it's not mine. It's still owned by the landowners and the people who own this building and have done for generations. They allow us to use it as a place to meditate, a meditation hall. They allowed us to refurbish it to make it comfortable to do so. So if someone was to come here, a senior monk, they could come and sit on the asana and teach Dharma comfortably, as could the Buddha. But it is just a building, and that's all. So I think that answers that final part of that question, and hopefully all of those three parts of that question, and a little bit in conjunction with my just recent experiences. And I do need to go, I am going off again shortly to, I have been there before, to the Buddhist Sasana, so this big religious organisation in Colombo. Once again, it's a long process to establish what requirements are, or what yet I have to meet to get a different kind of visa for staying here not longer, because I already have a tourist visa here for 5 years, but to make these little trips unnecessary every 6 months. I don't mind the trips every 6 months, but people, lay practitioners, supporters of the Buddhist Sasana, or of the Sangha more specifically, have to pay for these trips, which, albeit are not that expensive, that money could be directed to more worthy causes within Sri Lanka itself, rather than just big airlines and travel. For me, it's very cheap. It's really just the airline ticket that costs the money in the first place. We try to keep that within Sri Lanka, but it's still a big airline. So it's still a waste of money. So I'm going to the Buddhist Sasana to just try and reorganise that again soon. So I hope there's something useful there today in what we've been talking about that you can use. But if not, just let it go. Don't let it worry you. Don't think about it unnecessarily. And come back again. Until next time, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.